Okay, we are now into part 3-2 of the Flutter4CME series, and let's start talking about some list views. And I'm going to show how they are separated first, and then I'm going to show you how to do this by using a builder. And I tried to set this up in a way of what are the widgets, and then how do you make it easier to work with those early widgets. And then what are lists, and how can you make it more powerful as you're building the lists. And before I do that, I would like to make one quick update to the column itself as we are trying to build this. But I would like you to keep in mind as you are doing this by yourself, I'll also have the link to the GitHub here. And on purpose, I separated out after I had main separate, and essentially all main has is that theme and home. Here, each of the homes starts from various levels of complexity. So you can start with a very, very, very basic, and then you can get to the next version, and it mostly follows along with this series. I changed some of the order of what I did compared to what I did at the workshop because I think it would be a little bit easier. But if you are trying to figure out, rather than just give you the whole app and we just show it and copy paste, I think it makes some logical steps as to why we built down these paths. So let's get right into it. If you look on this app itself, what we have so far is all the stuff in build app bar, and then all the stuff in build bottom nav bar. And right now, build body is exactly one container that's blue and a child with the row that says EMEA. And I can actually wrap this entire container into a column. So wrap this with a column, and one of those widgets is going to be a container. The other one, just to show it, I'm going to make a text that says text, put a comma here, and then the final one I'm just going to do the same. And I'll just put a comma at the end there. If I hit save, you can see there's some text, and here is this widget itself. So why am I doing this? Well, first off, I want this whole part to take all of the screen itself. And second of all, if you look here, I want this widget to be an image, and I want this image, or this widget, to basically just be a list view. And this is where that more advanced list view comes in, but I figured I might as well just finish this picture and get that whole part set up. So as we're working on this, just because I think it may be helpful for you, I'm going to wrap this in a container, and I'm going to make that color let's make this one blue or green, and let's make this one blue, just so you can see how things are actually filling out. Let's do red. Okay, so if you look, so the column goes down, but it's not finishing or filling everything out all the way. That's one issue that we'll need to deal with. The second one is we need to make this top container actually become a image. And then the final part is that we're going to build from this and make it something useful. So let's do the image first, and then we'll work our way backwards. This image right here, I have saved ahead of time. Here, it's called 2019 CIC logo. And if I want to put this in here, I should make a folder. I like the term, you could call it images, or you could call it assets. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you are consistent. And I'm just going to drag this into the assets folder. If you are making any changes within with these images and these assets, you actually want to call this in pubspec.yaml, and actually tells you here that you need to add assets to your application you have to add it like this. And so I'm just going to do uncomment this, and then do assets slash whatever this is called, including the PNG. I made changes to PubSpec, so I'm going to have to hot refresh or hot restart. And there is a keyboard shortcut for that. And let's go back over to home, and let's replace this container with the actual image itself. And so I'm just going to call this right over to here, image.asset, and then I have to put in the actual name. So you guys see hyphen, and actually I have this already copied, which is going to make my life so much easier. Okay, so there's that. That's good. Now let's work our way over and down. You notice there's a little bit of a skip here. The way that we're able to get around that is we can, as I had mentioned earlier, when you have the Flutter.dev widgets class, when you're looking at the widgets catalog, and specifically for layout, container is great, but sometimes there's things that are just really small and short that can make your job much, much easier. And padding is one option, size box is another one. And so if you look at this, we have now the image, no space in between them. So we actually want to create a little bit of space there, no space here, and then we're going to have to put in that container the actual list view. So on this part, we have this image asset. Now I'm going to call a sized box, and we're going to call the height 16. Whoa. And put a comma here, and that should give us a little bit of padding. It's pretty close. And let's just copy that, because we're going to want to have that just below us as well. And so now you've got a little bit of padding here and a little bit of padding there. Actually, I think I like 12 better. Many of these things are in multiples of 4 or 8, just FYI. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit closer. Okay, so then the final part will be actually creating this part and starting to work with ListView on a much larger scale. So we're still on this ListView.separated and learning how to work with a list view itself, and also kind of working around the builder, I think does take a little bit of a logical leap. So I'm just going to show you from the widget catalog, when we're talking about scrolling, and there's different ways that you can get to this part, but the list view is one of the things where you can actually interact with and scroll. And it's got a few ways that you can create a list, where you can actually create it. One is where you just put each widget directly in here, and we could actually do that on our own. The second way is if you use the builder, and I had mentioned this separate part where you have an anonymous method or anonymous class where you actually build. This is what it takes in, and then this is what it returns, but you don't have to separate this whole part out. And then the final one, if you look, this doesn't have any separate part in between. This one does. It's got those little extra parts. And so the ListView.separated is ultimately going to be the one that we want to use and how we want to build our app itself using an item builder. That is what we're going to work our way up to, but I am going to just start simple, just so that I think it's going to be a little bit easier of a logical leap. So this is what we have, and we have been working on building the body itself. Now we are down to this actual container, this part, which is this red one. And the first thing I will say is I want this to go all the way down to the edge. And I actually want it, if you look, this has got a card with that little bit of elevation first, and then it has the list view just under it. And so what I'm going to do with this part is I'm actually going to return this as a, well, just so you can see it, a card. And I'm just going to set the margin, well, I'll set the margin in a minute. I'll set the elevation to 8.0. That determines how large the actual card is itself. You see that little shadowing that's around there. And the other thing that I want to do with this card is I want this in something in a brand new widget. Let's see. Wrap with new widget. And I want this in something called expanded. And I haven't defined expanded yet, but it essentially means I want this to take all the rest of the remaining space. That's all that means. The other thing I think is going to be important with this is if you see it only taking this little bitty spot, I want it to go expand out this way and expand out this way. And to do that in the column, I have to set the cross-axis alignment to cross-axis alignment dot stretch. If I hit save, now it's going to get all the way over and all the way down. The final part I will do on here, just so that you can see this a little bit better. So this is all working on this spot. I'm going to reformat it just so you can see a little better. Well, I need a little bit of extra margins on the side, and then we will take this and actually work our way through. So we set the elevation to 8. If you wanted to see what it looked like at 4, you can. It's going to be just a little bit less shadowing. I think it actually looks pretty good. It's kind of hard to see right now. Margins I'm going to set, and I'm going to do edge and sets dot all of 12.0, and let's see what that looks like. So now it's just a little bit smaller. Since I have that, I probably no longer need this size box. I think that looks a little bit better. Now you should be able to see what happens if I add more to the, you see the shadowing changes down at the bottom here. And I think that's probably okay for now. And let's see, we no longer need this to be red, so we can just get rid of that. And the child itself, this part, is going to be where we set our list view in this next part of the video. Okay, so now we're going to start putting a list view into this area where you have the text itself. So I'm going to start by, and if you see me with this comma here, this is the actual text. I'm going to cut this part out and just call a list view rather than these two for now, just to make it, I think hopefully this will make a little bit more sense. And within the children, I'm going to have a text, and a text. If I hit save, you should see text, text, text. Now, if I was to do this by implementing an actual builder, well, there's an easy way where you can do that as well. So let's work our way up to builder. And within there, you no longer are using this section where you have the widgets itself. You do here, item builder, and it's going to have to call a function. And that function is going to take build context and the index, which basically means what position in this list is it. And what it's going to return is going to be, let's just do that. And you need a semicolon at the end of this right here is its own. Well, there's a few terms. It's basically an anonymous function or a lambda. And let's make the item count to 8. You should see 8 right here. Okay, that's pretty cool. If I made this 12, it will bring it up to 12. If you notice, they're not actually separated out. And so what I'm going to just go ahead and do is make this separated. And for the only difference between me doing this with .separated as compared to .builder, and you can find this out as you're looking through the actual part. So .builder only takes item builder. .separated here takes item builder, and then it takes a separate one called separator builder. And those are where you actually make the dividers themselves. So it's kind of like you're building your way up. So item builder isn't going to change. The next thing you also will need here is going to be separator builder. And I guess I can put this on the top or the bottom, it doesn't really matter. Just as long as you call the name of it, and it's going to be one of these, again, an anonymous function. It's going to also take build context and index, and it's going to return, let's see, a divider, and let's just see what that does. Okay, so for each one where it's in between, now you've got a divider and you can scroll up and down, and that seems to be working pretty well. We are slowly working our way up. If you notice this is a little bit darker, I'm just going to make this divider a little bit darker as well by changing the colors to black 45. Now you can see it a little bit better as well. Okay, so there's progress. All right, and now this whole part is starting to get unwieldy again. If you see this build body, we have something and we have something and we have something. Let's just make this a little bit easier to see and to review. And I think as we're going to do this, we're going to take this build body and we're just going to take this whole row out, and we're going to take the other whole card out as well. And so I'm just going to call this container down to here. I'm going to separate this out. I'm going to call this widget underscore AMIA row. It's not going to take anything in, but it will return a container. And that's going to be right here. Let's see if that breaks my app. It did not. That's good. And then the other one is going to be this expanded all the way down to the card. And so I'm just going to pull that out as well. I'm going to call it underscore upcoming events card. Oops. Return this with a semicolon at the end, and here, and that should still work. And so I called it that just because this says upcoming events. Now, if you look at the way this whole thing is structured, I've got build app bar, I have build body, I've got within build body, it's going to call the AMIA row, and it's going to call the upcoming events card. This is getting a little bit easier to work with. All of that is being called by build at the very bottom. So now that we have this, let's start working on actually creating the difference between this top one and the ones that are below it. Okay, so as we are working our way down, I'm going to just call a separate part here. So the separator builder we've done. Now we're just going to start working on this part. And really what I want to do is I'm going to call a widget. I'm going to call this first row. And it's going to return we'll just do Flutter text and call it first row. And then I'm going to copy this part and make another private method. I'm going to call this other rows. I'm going to make sure that I keep that underscore so that it can't be called by other classes outside of this. Other rows. I'm going to hit save. That's not going to do anything because I haven't implemented it in this item builder yet. And so, as you've heard me say, everything is a widget. I'm going to decide if this is the first widget, it's going to call one. If otherwise, it's going to call the other ones. And I'm going to do this by saying, look, if the index is equal to 0, then I'm going to call something. Otherwise, I will call something different. This is a really useful part from Dart. And I'll show you where that comes from because it is going to be something that you call pretty frequently. All right. There's the first row. There are the other rows. If you look at dart.dev and you go back over to their language tour and you search for a question mark. Here we go. If you have, Dart has both expressions, which have runtimes, and statements, which don't. The conditional expression, condition, question mark, if true, follow this expression. If false, follow that one. That is really, really, really helpful because you can do that in line while you're actually writing your code, and it makes it very clean and streamlined. So here is where that only unique row is, and all we have to do is just make this a row with an icon and some text. And then this part, all we have to do is make this a row and then a column, and we've essentially made a mirror of this list. We're almost done. Okay, so at this point, we've gone pretty much in depth on the difference between ListView just by itself, ListView.builder, and ListView.separated. And I've tried to pull in, the benefits of actually using a separate builder and how you can harness that in a pretty powerful way. So let's just go ahead and finish out what these text elements are actually going to look like. In the first row, what it's going to show is, so if you look, it's just a row. So I'm going to take this whole part out. I'm going to drag this over just a little bit more so everybody can see it. Maybe it's going to be easier over here, and let's switch them. So you see the icon and then where it says upcoming events, and all of this exists in a row. So I'm just going to implement a row with children, and one of them is going to be an icon, and that's icons.event. And the other one, if I just hit save, you should see that little icon right up here. And I actually want to make this just a little bit larger, and I need to implement just a bit of extra padding as well. So what I'm going to do here is, if you look at the icon itself, and you can sometimes as a shorthand type in here we go, size, and let's just make this 24. Let's do color, and colors.black 45, and just hit save. That's a little bit better. And then what we will do after this icon is we will implement a size or a text. I'm still using the snippet and just call this upcoming events. And you've already seen the style of text style. And let's just change that color to colors.black 45. And while we're at it, let's make it bold. So font weight dot bold. All right, that's pretty good, except that they're still very, very close to each other. So that trick I showed you earlier with sized boxed still works. And we're going to do this with width instead of height. And let's just do 8 and add a comma and see what that does. Okay, that's better. We can also implement a little bit of margin over here on this left side and try and get this a little bit easier to see. And we could do this in the row itself, but it's probably a little bit easier to do this within the list view. There's margins and there's padding. And 8.0. Margins are on the outside, padding is on the inside. And that is what allowed you to get this on the to get this extra part. Now finally we're going to work on these other rows and see what we can do about implementing this in a manner that actually mirrors here. And I'm just going to make this so that I think it's, let's get rid of that trailing comma so this all gets pulled up. And honestly, these two parts are pretty similar to those two parts. So let's at least just start by copying from this part to there. That should get all three. And let's paste this here. Let's see, that actually needs to be a row. And those children are going to be this. And this should actually mirror all of that. Yeah, so it's not going to say other events, so that we know that this is separate itself. And then the next thing that I'm going to do on here is I'm just going to, so we have an icon, and that's good. Let's see, the next part after this is going to be a, well, first off, we can actually just make this icon a little bit larger. So let's make it 64 and see what happens. That's better. And then the other thing that we can do is this text, instead of having this text, we can actually make it a expanded, which means it's going to use that whole area of space, and within that will be a column. So if I didn't have the expanded in here, so you'll actually be able to see, I've shown you this earlier. If I wrapped this with a container and then I changed the color to colors.red, it only stops there. Whereas if I wrap this whole thing inside of a container, an expanded, now it's going to take up all the available space. So from this container all the way down to the end of it, I actually want this to be a column. And within that column, it's going to have 3 children. And we'll just call that registration open. Flutter text social event. And what's the next one? 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. on comma APR 29. Let's see what that happens. Okay, that's getting there. Last one is going to be great room foyer. Yeah, great room. Okay. Now, so we've got one. We have this, which expands all the way out. If you look, there's still one more icon that we need to implement at the far end, and then we will make this part just look a little bit more like it should, and make sure that they all start on the far left. So while we're at it, I guess we might as well just implement that, because that's easy. cross-axis alignment dot start. Whoops. There we go. Hit save. So now these are all across and they're all left justified. That's pretty helpful. At the end of that expanded, I'm going to have to hit a comma and I'm going to have to include one more icon. And honestly, just to make this faster, what I'll do is this whole icon right there, I'm just going to copy that and press paste. Let's see what happens. Yep, there we go. And what we want here is actually going to be a more underscore vert. And the size of that isn't going to be anywhere near that. We like multiples of 8, so let's just see what 48 does. That's much closer. We could actually bring this one, down a little bit. So let's do 40. Let's see what happens. Not quite. Let's do 36. Closer. Okay. 24 actually may be good. Yeah. And that looks pretty close. Now the final part that we have here is just going to be making this bold, making these gray, and making this blue and underlined. And honestly, all this is just Flutter text styles. That's it. So this registration open, you've already seen this before, style, text style, and then for font weight is going to be font weight dot bold. That should make this in bold. Similarly, if you look at this one, style, text style, the color of this one is going to be blue. And it's actually a little bit dark, so we use those higher numbers to get a very dark blue. And you've not seen this yet, but a decoration is the way that you're able to underline something or do all these various like overline or put a line through it or things like that. So let's hit save and let's see what that did. All right, that's done. That's done. Now all we have to do left is just make those last two gray. And you've already seen that the style, text style, and color, two colors dot black 45, that's a pretty good looking gray. Let's see what that looks like. Yep. And really all we're going to do is we're just going to copy that part minus that comma because I don't want it to go away whenever I save, and add it here. And there you go. Now we've essentially created a mirror of this app.